are talking The Power. Now that title may seem somewhat generic, I won't lie, but the actual meaning of it is quite clever because it actually has a multi-dimensional meaning to it, which I'll kind of come on to in just a second. So this is directed and written by Karina Faith and is a story set in 1974 London, England. And it follows a young nurse on the first day of her job in this particular hospital. Now, at this period of time in London, there were a variety of industrial action which led to power being shut off overnight to conserve power. So this tells the story of this young nurse, her first night on the job in this hospital where the power is off and the only kind of source of light is, you know, gas lanterns and things like this. And there is some type of supernatural presence in this hospital. That's kind of your basic story setup. I will give a shout out to Movies and Mania who turned me on to this movie because they know I do like a haunted hospital movie. Now the title itself refers to the actual power, literal power coming from the the lack of lights and stuff, and you know there's no power in this hospital. But also there's another meaning of power. So although I think maybe this title doesn't help the movie being so generic, I understand the reason why it was chosen, and I think it's quite clever in some way because the power refers to a different type of power entirely. What do I think that works with this movie? As I've said, I'm a huge fan of haunted hospitals. I think they intrinsically have a kind of a fear factor in there because you know that people are sick, dying. It's a large building and it's never very a happy place, these places, are they? And they just have this, they can be used very effectively to create a somber and haunting atmosphere. And this movie does do that. This is less of a jump scare film and more of a building of the tension, you know, creepy moments and things like this, and an unravelling mystery about maybe what has happened within this hospital to, you know, to ultimately cause these paranormal activities. And I think that the actual, the intent of the movie has a social political message as well. It's I do kind of commend, and I do think it was, it attempts to shine a light on certain behaviours, which I think is always going to be commendable. It's a double-edged sword, which we're going to come on to a little bit later on. But nonetheless, I applaud the attempt to have a kind of a horror movie with a message, so to speak. Acting-wise, I've got to say, I thought the actors did a great job here. It's a British movie, and they kind of have kind of London accents, and obviously take place in the 70s. I have seen a few critiques about the acting. I can only assume it's because of their accents, to be honest with you, because I thought the acting was all very good here, and I've got to say, everyone does a great job. But they kind of, I guess they sound the typical accents that you would have seen, like Dick Van Dyke trying to do in kind of Mary Poppins and stuff like that. So maybe people in America see this as kind of an odd choice, but that's kind of, I suppose, it just is the way people speak at that time in that area. So, as I said, there are some good horror elements here. It is disturbing in some respects, both in a psychological sense and in a, you know, there's a genuine kind of paranormal presence here that does do some kind of scary things, but also it's the horror maybe that you're not expecting, that maybe will be the kind of the more horrific things that you may find out about this movie. I've got to say, I really thought the score was very good in this movie, actually, in the musical score. It really does emphasise this oppressive kind of nature, and you know, was fantastic, as was the set design. And there's some subtle things here that I think work really well. When you see, for example, in the child's ward, there's pictures of like nurses, cartoons of nurses, and they're kind of like scratched out, and that has a meaning and things like this. And I just thought it was very well done in regards to the kind of the overall. It's giving you these subtle messages within the film without explicitly kind of telling you about what's kind of going on. What doesn't work for me? Okay, so I have to say, I think the second act is a little muddled. The movie has a mystery in it, and obviously all will be revealed at the end, But the movie's narrative, I feel, the second act gets particularly kind of muddled. And this is not helped by the fact that the movie is dark, as in, figuratively it's dark, as in the subject matter is probably darker maybe than you may initially think, but also literally dark because there's no lights. So it's very kind of visually uninteresting in some ways because it's just dark screens a lot of the time and kind of sort of figures walking around. So there's not much to see on screen in a weird way, but the story is so muddled in the middle. I've got to be honest, I think the interest levels dip off. Now, I will say, I think the first act is strong, and I think the second act is strong, if there's a little bit of an exposition dump in that as well. So the third act is strong. The finale is, does kind of, I think, answer all the questions, but as I say, it relies a little bit on exposition to me when I felt the second act could have been better to reveal certain things earlier on, thus not needing to kind of have it all kind of explained to you at the end. That's obviously my opinion about that, but nonetheless, it makes for a little bit discombobulated in regards to its kind of narrative flow. I have one other criticism, but it is a spoiler. And I was thinking, how am I going to say this, but without spoiling it? And I can't. So suffice it to say, I did think this movie is an above-average film. I'd go as far as to say as I think it's a 7 out of 10. But I have a critique that I will talk about now, which is a spoiler. So 7 out of 10 is my score. But let me just talk about this other issue that I have with it. Now, as I've mentioned, this film has a social, political message and undertones in the film. But last chance, if you don't want to hear the spoiler, get out of here. My issue with this movie is that all of the male characters that we are introduced to are negative characters. There's not one redeeming male character in this movie. Now, the abuse of power is referring to the institution and kind of like the male characters within this. Be they physically abusive, are they apathetic, or are they caught up in bureaucracy? There is various different kind of levels of abuse of power that are demonstrated by literally every single male character in this movie. And if you're going to have a social political message, it comes across as very strong, but maybe a little heavy-handed. And I would have thought it would have been maybe advisable to have a male character that isn't all bad, if that makes sense. They aren't all very, very negative characters. It's just to kind of balance it out a little bit, because I've got to be honest, it does end up seeming some like it has a little bit too politically motivated at times, and I don't know if this was but clearly is the intent, but I don't know the reasons behind the intent. But I think for a general audience, it comes across as, somewhat too politically motivated at times. I won't let that really take away from the score, if I'm honest, because I think that criticism may not obviously bother some people, but I got to say I can imagine it bothering some, and I think the film would have been better for having a male character, even a relatively small character that is, doesn't have these negative things that are to do with them. Now, you can argue that that's how it was back in the 70s, but it's it's just a little problematic for me, I have to say. So overall, as I've said, I think this movie is a well-made film. I think it's maybe not the kind of the most thrilling of movies, but it's well-made, and I think there's enough skill here in subtle filmmaking that really kind of warrants this as a good 7 out of 10 for me, because I think it does show that subtlety can work. So and it just sets the mood so well, and I've got to say I thought it was quite good. As I say, shout out to Movies and Manu who turned me onto this movie. 7 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? And what did you think about my critiques? Any thoughts on that? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.